Hello and welcome to the INET studios in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. Since 2007, INET has covered the year's top news stories, and 2012 will be no exception. With the end of the world behind us, INET reports 2012 Year in Review. Arguably the most important news story of 2012 was the US presidential election. Election news topped the headlines for a good portion of the 2012 news cycle, first with the race for the Republican nomination and later when campaigning began in earnest. The election was predicted to be a close call, but on election night the scales tipped solidly in favor of Barack Obama and the Democrats, except in Florida where votes were counted late into the night. While Americans were voting for their president, Syrians were fighting to the death. Syria's bloody civil war started in March of 2011 and continues to this day. As 2012 unfolded, the world bore witness to one massacre after another. Homs, Hula, Tremseh, and finally the capital Damascus, all blurred into an endless parade of bodies, victims from both sides of the conflict. World leaders condemned the violence, and many called for Syrian President Bashar al-Assad to resign, something that may have stopped much of the violence. As 2013 looms and the Syrian war approaches its second year, Assad's hold on power seems to be crumbling, but it may be many months yet before Syria sees peace again. It was described as the worst violence in South Africa since the end of apartheid, and it took place at the Marikana mine on August 16th. 38 miners who were on strike at the time were shot dead by police. Reports as to what led up to the shooting conflict. Some claim that an angry group of miners began firing on police, while other reports claim that police opened fire on the miners with little or no warning. The shooting led to countrywide protests, but few answers. The miners and the mining company later reached an agreement that saw the vast majority of the miners return to work. In 2011, Egyptian citizens toppled dictator Hosni Mubarak when they gathered en masse to protest their president's near 40-year-long rule. And in 2012, Egyptians saw the fruits of their success. Elections were held over May and June and saw the election of Mohamed Morsi, an Islamic candidate representing the Freedom and Justice Party. The honeymoon didn't last long, however. On November 22nd, Morsi issued a constitutional decree granting himself dictator-like powers. Egyptian citizens were not pleased and took to the streets by the thousands to demonstrate. After the anti-Morsi protests began, supporters of the new president also began demonstrating, and the country has seen running street battles between protesting groups and police. The United States wasn't the only country that held elections in 2012. Russia also held presidential elections. On March the 4th, Vladimir Putin was re-elected as the president of Russia with 63% of the popular vote. Because Putin allegedly received so many votes, many Russian citizens claimed electoral irregularities, and a massive protest against the result was held on March 11th. Protests by citizens dissatisfied with Putin and his United Russia Party have been ongoing throughout the year, flaring up as recently as December. 2012 was a particularly bloody year in the United States after 5 mass shootings took place in that country. The first shooting took place in Aurora, Colorado, at a movie theater showing the premiere of the new Batman film on July 20th. A lone gunman wearing tactical gear set off tear gas in the movie theater and began shooting into the crowd. 12 people were killed in that incident and more than 50 injured. The second mass shooting of 2012 took place at a Sikh temple in the American state of Wisconsin in August. The lone gunman, a white supremacist, killed 7 people and injured 4 others, including a responding police officer. The gunman turned the gun on himself after he was wounded by police. In April, 7 people were killed and 3 injured after a gunman opened fire at Oikis University in California. The perpetrator of that crime was 43-year-old 1L Go, a former student of the school. Next, a shooting at an Oregon shopping mall on December 11th left 2 people dead and a 3rd injured. 22-year-old Jacob Roberts ran into the Clackamas Town Center at 15:25 and began shooting at shoppers and mall employees. Roberts committed suicide after that attack. The final and worst attack took place on December 14th, 2012 in Newtown, Connecticut, and will likely go down in history as one of the worst examples of mass murder in American history. Just after 09:30 Eastern Time, a lone gunman, Adam Lanza, forced his way into the local elementary school and opened fire. 6 adults and, most horrifying, 20 children between the ages of 5 and 10 were senselessly murdered before Lanza turned the gun on himself. Shock in France after a shooting at a Jewish school took place on March 15th in Toulouse. 23-year-old French-Algerian terrorist Mohamed Merah drove up to the school on a motorcycle and shot dead 3 children and 1 adult. French police tracked Merah to his apartment, and the situation was only resolved after a 30-hour standoff with police, after which Merah was shot dead by police. Tempers flared in the occupied Gaza Strip in November of 2012 when the Israeli military launched an offensive into Gaza City in response to a series of rockets launched into Israel by Hamas militants. Over the course of the conflict, nearly 1,500 rockets were fired into Israel, and the Israeli military launched a series of airstrikes into Gaza which killed more than 160 Palestinians. The two sides signed a peace agreement on November 21st, just 7 days after the conflict began. The amateur film, The Innocence of Muslims, uploaded to YouTube in July, sparked riots and protests across the Middle East after excerpts of the film were aired on Egyptian television. In Cairo, protesters stormed the American embassy and replaced the US flag with an Islamic one. The American embassy was also a target in Yemen. Angry protesters there tried to breach the outer walls. In Libya, a terrorist attack against the American consulate in Benghazi may have been sparked by anger over the film. Terrorists there attacked the consulate with rocket-propelled grenades and other heavy weapons and set fire to buildings. U.S. Ambassador to Libya, Christopher Stevens, was killed in that attack. Weather made big news headlines in 2012 when Hurricane Sandy caused massive damage and flooding in New York City. Heavy rains flooded low-lying areas and subway tunnels, while winds pummeled the city, wrecking buildings, twisting structures, and causing mass power outages. The hurricane inconvenienced thousands of people, killed nearly 50 in New York City alone, and suspended trading on the New York Stock Exchange for 2 days. It wasn't caused by a hurricane, but flooding devastated the Philippines in 2012 after monsoon rains dropped nearly 20 inches of water on the capital city Manila in just over 24 hours. Streets in the city were turned into rivers and many buildings damaged. At least 11 people were reported killed, and 80% of the capital city was flooded. In March, the Mali military staged a coup that forced the country's president into hiding. The coup was unilaterally condemned by the international community, and military forces passed control of the country to a transitional government on the 6th of April. The failed coup didn't have much impact on the capital city, but it did destabilize the northern region, which fell quickly under the control of Tuareg rebel forces. The rebels remain in control of Mali's north to this day. China made news headlines twice in 2012. The first was in April, after blind Chinese activist Chen Guangcheng escaped from house arrest and sought refuge at the American embassy in Beijing. Chen later left the U.S. embassy, some say after Chinese officials threatened his family, and sought medical treatment at a Beijing area hospital. U.S. officials were banned from visiting Chen during his hospital stay, and the whole situation sparked a sort of diplomatic shitstorm between the United States and China. Eventually, American and Chinese officials reached an agreement that would see Chen immigrate to the United States to further his education. Chen and his immediate family arrived in the States on May 20th. China also made news headlines when former politician Bo Xilai was implicated in a murder investigation causing a minor political scandal. Bo's wife, Gu Kailai, was later convicted of murdering Neil Hayward, a British businessman. Following the murder investigation, Bo was quickly removed from his position as party chief and officially kicked out of the Communist Party on November 1st. Violence in Nigeria made headlines in January after an attack saw the deaths of 185 people. Gunmen in police uniforms broke into police buildings and set all contained prisoners free. The attackers then set fire to the buildings and began to shoot civilians. The country was only brought under a state of control after the armed military patrols were allowed to roam the streets and a curfew was imposed. Boko Haram militants have claimed responsibility for that attack. Kim Jong-un inherited control of North Korea, one of the most reclusive nations on Earth, in 2011 after his father Kim Jong-il passed away. Kim Jong-un, eager to establish his role as the country's military leader, set his nation on a course to launch a long-range rocket. The first rocket launch was attempted in April, and the launch itself was reportedly a failure, with the rocket falling quickly into the ocean. Round 2 took place on December 11th and was much more successful, with the rocket landing off the coast of the Philippines. Both rocket launches have been condemned by international leaders. Anger flared up around the world in August after 3 members of the Russian punk rock band Pussy Riot were convicted of hooliganism and sentenced to 2 years in prison. The band was arrested after they performed a protest song at an Orthodox Christian church. Demonstrators in support of the band took to the streets in protest in cities around the world to show their support. 2012 was an historic year for the reclusive nation of Burma after the country continued on a path of democratic reforms that started the previous year. The most significant change was the by-election, which took place on April the 1st. Burma held the by-election to fill 46 vacant parliamentary seats, and the National League for Democracy Party, led by Aung San Suu Kyi, grabbed 43 of the available seats. Suu Kyi herself made headlines in 2012 after she traveled around the world, visiting the UK and the United States. Demonstrations took place across the United States after 17-year-old Trayvon Martin, an unarmed teenager, was shot by neighborhood watch coordinator George Zimmerman. Anger across the U.S. erupted after police investigating the shooting never charged Zimmerman with a crime. After national and international media attention focused on the small Florida community where the shooting took place, police did end up charging Zimmerman with second-degree murder. A trial date has been set for June of 2013. The London 2012 Summer Olympics kicked off in late July and ran through mid-August. The Games were, for the most part, considered a resounding success, but of course, like every Olympics, there were a few minor scandals. British residents were upset when surface-to-air missile batteries were mounted on residential apartment blocks. The security contractor G4S failed to recruit appropriate staff to police the Games, and the American Olympic uniforms were criticized for being manufactured in China. Technology news now, and for once Apple isn't responsible for the #1 story. On August 6, 2012, NASA successfully landed Curiosity, a rover and portable laboratory designed to explore the surface of Mars. The landing took place amidst live news coverage and much excitement. Just minutes after the successful touchdown, cheers erupted from the NASA control room as the first images taken by Curiosity were received back here on Earth. NASA also made news headlines in 2012 after the iconic Space Shuttle program was officially discontinued. Government funding for the program was cut off in 2011. For now, the only way to reach the International Space Station is by way of Russian rockets. However, private space exploration company SpaceX proved in 2012, when they docked with the ISS, that private industry will play a role in future space exploration. Apple Computer made headlines in 2012 when they launched the iPad 3, followed by the iPad 4 and the iPad mini. All 3 tablet computers were greeted by huge lines of Apple fans and sold-out stores. Apple also released the iPhone 5 in 2012, which also proved to be popular with consumers. The jury is still out on Windows 8, the latest iteration of Microsoft's consumer operating system. Windows 8 is unique in that it attempts to blend traditional desktop productivity with a tablet-friendly user interface. Some consumers love it and some despise it, but with the right customization, Windows 8 can be configured to make most users happy. Every year there are news stories that don't necessarily meet the criteria for major international news. And yet every year the mass media latches on to one or more of these stories, and the sheer volume of press coverage manages to propel the story into being an international sensation. 2012 was no exception, and it's now time for INET's Media Moments. The #1 live news event of 2012 was the Diamond Jubilee of Queen Elizabeth II. Celebrations marking the British Queen's 60th anniversary on the throne took place on February 6th in the UK, but the coverage didn't stop there. Celebrations, both live and recorded, were carried in media outlets around the world. South Korean rapper PSY made headlines in 2012 when his video Gundam Style went viral on the video-sharing website YouTube. In the 6 months since Gundam Style was released in July, it has been viewed over 1 billion times, the first video in the history of YouTube to reach that milestone. What started as a simple prank phone call ended in tragedy when nurse Jacinta Saldana committed suicide on December 6th. The incident started on the 4th of December when 2 Australian DJs phoned the King Edward VI Hospital in the UK pretending to be the Queen and Prince Charles. The 2 DJs were inquiring about the condition of the Duchess of Cambridge, who had been admitted to the hospital for severe morning sickness. Mrs. Saldana answered the initial telephone call and transferred it to another nurse who gave details about the Duchess's condition. Finally, Karen Klein, a 68-year-old school bus monitor, made news headlines around the world when a video of some vulgar 7th grade students mercilessly harassing her was uploaded to YouTube. The internet community rose up in support of Klein, and one campaign managed to raise more than $500,000 so that she could take a much-needed vacation. The students featured in the video have been severely reprimanded. From political uprisings to politics as usual. From sudden fame to stately anniversaries, 2012 has certainly been a year to remember. And with the supposed end of the world squarely behind us and fading into memory, the future seems a little bit brighter. From all of us here at INET, Happy New Year and best wishes in 2013.